The jointer is primarily a milling machine. It's used for flattening the faces of boards and squaring up their edges. To understand the safety and setup of this tool, we need to understand how it works. Let's take a look. The way the jointer works is it has an infeed table and an outfeed table, and in between a spinning cylinder of blades. Now the way this is set up is that the outfeed table and the blades are at the same height, and you adjust the infeed table lower than these two, so that when you come off the infeed onto the outfeed table, you're skimming off a little bit of material. The setup of this machine depends on what type of cut you're doing. Let's take a look first at flattening a face. There's really only a couple setup adjustments we'll want to make when we're flattening a face. One is to adjust the position of this fence. Basically, we need to have enough room for our board to pass over these blades. Now the fence is adjustable, it can move front to back, and there's a lock back here that you need to unlock in order to move it. Once that's unlocked, you can just drag it forward or backward. So the idea, like I said, is to get the width to be enough so that your board can pass over the blades. Then you lock the fence back up. Now the only other adjustment on this tool is the depth of cut. That, like we said, is just the difference between these two table heights, and that is adjusted down below. There's a wheel and a lever on this machine that you can unlock and raise and lower this infeed table. Sometimes that lever is a wheel. Now once you set that, and you should only really set that to be a very small amount, somewhere between a 1/16 and a 32nd of an inch, then you're ready to go. Make sure you lock the table back in place. That table can move up and down if you press down hard enough. And the only other controls you need to know about on this machine are the on and off switch here. So we've got a big red off switch and inside the on. Okay, that takes care of the setup of the machine. What else do we need to do to prepare for this operation? Well, one of the things you're going to want to do is to mark your wood. If it's not a rough piece, you're not going to be able to tell when it's flat. So take a piece of chalk or pencil and make a bunch of lines on the face that you are jointing. That goes face down. Next thing is, let's understand what's happening with the machine. What are its reference surfaces and what are the forces at work? Okay, the forces at work are this blade spinning towards us. So we know we're going to have to provide sufficient effort to get that across the blades as it's pushing back on us. The other thing to know is the reference surface. Our reference surface in this case is the outfeed table. That's the only place we're going to be applying pressure, is at the outfeed table. Okay, knowing those things, then we're ready to do this cut. One of the safety aspects of this machine is the blades are spinning and they're very sharp. We don't want to pass our hands over the blade, so we're going to use push pad and a push stick to guide our wood over the blades. When you're flattening a face, you have a choice of which side to start with on your board, and you want to pick the face that's the flattest and the most stable. So the easy way to do that is actually put it on the table itself and check. So check on one side. You can push on it, see if it moves. This board has a little bit of rocking to it, which means it's cupped in this direction. So I'm going to flip it over and check the other side. Yep, it's pretty stable on this side, it's not moving. That means it's resting on the two peaks that are pointing down. So a cup board is very common, and you'll have, this one's very slightly cupped, but it has a slight cup in this direction. So we want to be resting on these 2 points rather than rocking on this middle section. Okay, knowing the reference surfaces and knowing what we need to do to get this wood through the blade, now we can begin. It's basically just a very simple motion of passing the wood over top of the blades without pressing down on the blades or the infeed table. You're only pressing down as you get onto the outfeed table. Keep constant pressure on the outfeed table, complete the cut. Now notice where I'm standing. I'm standing centered on the machine, and I'm not reaching, I'm not leaning, so have a good balance, stand facing the machine so you can do this work easily. Okay, here's a live demonstration. Okay, our board got completely flattened in one go, but often you may have to run it through multiple times in order to get it flat, if it's a rough board starting out with. In that case, we do not adjust the height. Again, it's set at our 1/32 of an inch, so there's no need to change it. With this machine, in order to take off more material, you do multiple passes. The other operation you might do on the jointer is to square up an edge. Now, in order to square up an edge, because of the reference surfaces on the jointer, we need to have at least one flat face. Let's take a look. To square up our edge, we need to use the fence as our reference surface. So, similar to how we did the face, we're going to be passing the wood over top of the blades. It's going to skim a little bit off at the bottom and land on the outfeed table. So the whole time we're going to be needing to push this wood up against the back fence. And then once it gets on the outfeed table, that becomes a secondary reference surface as well. So we're going to have to push down as well as back into the fence. For squaring up the edge, all the machine setup is basically the same. We don't want to take off more than really a 1/32 of an inch, a 1/16 at most. We'll probably want to adjust the fence forward so that we don't have so much blade showing. So that's done in the same way as we did with the face. We unlock the fence, pull it forward. And here we just want enough of blade showing to allow this board to pass over the blades. The last thing in the setup, though, it's very important, is this fence is adjustable. It can tilt. And so you will always want to check to make sure that that fence is square to the table. So take an engineer's square and check and see that that is truly 90 degrees. If you don't have a rough board and there's a smooth edge here already, go ahead and mark it again like we did the face so that you can tell when it's been completely jointed. Okay, with the machine set at the right cutting depth and our fence pulled forward and 90 degrees, we're ready to make this cut. Now this is a little more complicated than jointing a face because we have to apply pressure in a couple different ways. The key takeaways here for your technique are, number one, you're going to need to keep pressure against the fence. That means finding a place for your hand to push against the fence that's above this guard and below the top of the fence. If you're above the top of the fence, you're going to push the board away. Obviously, you don't want to be below the guard. So, position your fingers in a way that they can push into the fence. Hook your thumb over the top. Your thumb is going to provide some downward pressure once we get on the outfeed table. Now your other hand is just pushing forward in a very neutral way. It's not pushing down, just forward. Now something to take note of here is my hand that I'm pushing against the fence, I'm going to keep it relatively close to the blade. Not on top of the blade, but a little bit past, so I'm on the outfeed table. That way I can keep a constant pressure against the fence right where the cut is happening. If I let my hand drift all the way down here when this is being cut, there's a chance that it can wander off the fence. I don't have as much leverage to keep it on the fence where it matters. So you're going to keep your hand pretty close to the blade, inching it back until you meet your other hand, and then you're done with this cut. Okay, let's see this in action. Here are a few things you want to avoid doing on the joiner. The joiner is not designed to handle end grain or cross grain, so we always want to have our grain oriented along these lines when we're going over the joiner. So don't pass the end grain, it doesn't work, it'll get caught and tear out. Similarly with cross grain, if we're going across the grain this way, it's going to tear out the wood and you're not going to get a good cut. It can also be quite dangerous. Something else to avoid is loose knots. So if you have a piece of wood that has a small knot in it that's going to come loose as it's being passed over the blades, you'll want to be aware of that, possibly pop that knot out, or better yet, just cut it out of the piece so that you're not using it. The jointer does have limitations on the size of wood that can be put through it. Now this is just common sense safety, but you don't want to pass a piece over this blade where your hands are have to be very, very close to the blade. This is too thin, it's too small, to get through here safely without putting your hands in harm's way.